So if we take the 10 years to 2028, so that 2018 to 2028, globally, 1 in 5 bottles of wine less or fewer will be sold. So if I put that another way, 20% reduction in that 10 years to 2028 of the total volume of wine consumed globally. So if you look at the dollar volume on that same comparison timeline, it's marginally increased. So the overall value is actually rising a little bit, but the volume is reducing. But if we do just look at the global trends, consumers are doing a few key things. They're moving to white wine from red. There is a move towards fresher, fruitier, and to a certain extent, sweeter red wine. There is definitely a move to rosé, and the expectation that we're seeing is that the previous growth we saw in sparkling wine will continue. The biggest single factor that impacts brand growth is awareness and salience. Because if I look after awareness, which can convert to salience, so this, I remember it at the point of purchase, that is the single biggest factor that's going to help my brand grow.
Hey guys, this is Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Trade Network and London Competition and host of your Wine Whiskey Week show. This one is a very special episode where I chat Lulie Halstead. He founded Wine Intelligence, and I love the conversation, because it was really practical and it was data driven and it was really, really consumer first conversation. So if you are in the wine business, especially if you're a winery, this is a gold mine here. She lays out, what you need to do in 2025, and especially the last bit of the call. You can fast forward if you want, but the last bit of the call is a question that I asked her, which is, what would you do if you were a winery? And that's where she puts everything into a strategy on what she would do. So check this episode out, and you're going to enjoy it by all the wisdom that she shares with us. Thank you. Hey guys, this is Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Trade Network and your host of the Wine Whiskey Week show. This one is a special episode where, I think it will bring a lot of value to the wineries and sort of anyone who's involved in the wine business globally, because what we're going to talk about is, how do wineries play in 2025, and who better can we have the insights from than Lulie Halstead. So she founded Wine Intelligence, I think almost in 2002, Lulie. So I'll have you speak more about it. And then you got acquired by IWSR in 2021, and I think you were still part of the board, advising them in helping them in the research and the data. So why don't you give us a little, recap about the audience that are just new entrepreneurs? I would put it that way, because I'm sure that a lot of people who have been in the industry for 10 more years know about you, but this is just for the new listeners. Just give us your little story here.
Great. Well, it's fantastic to be here with you today, Sid, and thanks for the invitation. Yes, so you're right. I have spent rather a long time now, as I am aging, working in wine consumer behavior research, now extended also to spirits, beer, and RTDs. So I spend my life thinking about, observing, talking to consumers, really trying to understand what the motivations are for consumers to help wine businesses and other drinks businesses globally to get their strategies right, their brandings right, and therefore their opportunities correct.
Fantastic. I think, you see a lot of data for sure. So any decision that you make would be a data-based decision as well. And then obviously intuition will also come based on the experience that you have. So I want to really, go into what, if you were a winery, how would you play 2025? Looking at the facts, right? Like we're not doing a fake optimism here. So we just want to stick with the practical optimism. That's what I call, looking at where the industry is. How would you, with two goals, okay? If you're a winery, you have two goals, growing the top line and generating profits. Okay, so I'll put those two metrics. How would you play 2025? So let me start with picking your brain on general trends. What are your observations, and what do you see happening in 2025? And then we can go in different elements of the questions.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you say, let's be realistic. 2025 is going to continue to be a tough year for wine. And that's also in the context of a tough and challenging year for TBA, so for total beverage alcohol. So if we just look at some of the kind of key top lines that are sort of coming across for us as we move into 2025, if we look at IWSR data and look globally, what is happening to TBA, so total beverage alcohol, we're now facing 2 years of declines in overall volume of alcohol consumption globally. And I think it's quite important to note that that's down 3.6%, that's volume globally for total beverage alcohol compared to the levels that we were at pre-pandemic, so in 2019. So that's the starting point. On top of that, what has really, as we're all very familiar, driven total beverage alcohol over the last few years has been premiumization. What we're now seeing at IWSR is that premiumization is flattening. So although we are seeing pockets of growth, particularly, for example, in spirits, in sort of super premium luxury, right at the top end, status spirits, for example, those kind of mid-priced premium, so premium and super premium categories across all beverage alcohol, wine, spirits included, are actually reducing and flattening. There has been a little pocket of growth actually in premium and super premium beer. So that has been a sort of stronger story for 2024 going into 25. And then, of course, the sort of third macro trend for beverage alcohol, including wine, is this moderation momentum is keeping going. So we're seeing this more kind of embedded moderation culture, which we can kind of touch on in a bit more detail. But those are the three kind of overarching data-driven trends that we're seeing going through into 2025.
Okay, I mean, 100% agreed. How would you play this, right? Like consolidation, SKU reset, market reset, like what's your master plan look like, and then, as I said, like we'll go detail, but at least like give me which markets, which SKUs, which category, instead of reinventing or trying to push what market doesn't want, do you think that's a good idea to see what the market is, wanting in next 12 months and sticking to that?
Yeah, well, you're talking to the right person on that one, as a person who is both obsessed with consumer and therefore obsessed with what we call market orientation. So I guess if we just kind of go back to 101, why do any of us run a business? And we're now talking about drinks and wine in particular. Why are we running those businesses? Typically it is to generate sustainable profit, being the kind of key driver of why we're doing that. And if we think about what generates sustainable profit, well, that's answering the needs and wants of our consumers who are willing to pay for our stuff. So from that point of view, for me, the kind of heart and soul of any business is understanding what our consumers value in terms of what do they want, how does it fit into their lives, and therefore tailoring our strategies around consumer demand. We have a history in wine of producing stuff and then expecting it to be sold in markets or consumers to want the stuff that we produce or that we love, rather than sort of 180 on that, which is actually what are people valuing and what are they going to buy and how do we shape our business around what they want as opposed to what we want in the business.
Amazing. I think a lot of big companies would be consumer-driven sort of companies because they would have the budget, or the retailers would be pushing them to give something if they want to maintain the shelf spaces and whatnot, right? So I'm just going there for a reason, because small producers, may not have the funds to adjust quickly or pivot, or always be live to the consumer changes. What does the small and medium-sized producer do? I mean, if completely it requires a capital investment change.
Yeah, and I think that's the big question that I get asked by my clients, that when I'm advising them, advising the leadership team, advising the boards, advising the owners. We have a fundamental challenge in wine, of course, which is, we put our vines in the ground, which costs a lot of money to do. I know, I did it 4 years ago at my own vineyard, and then we sit there and invest lots of money in nurturing our vine babies for 4, 5, or 6 years before we start to get to full production. So we have that real challenge in wine, which is that, we can't move quickly. If we compare that, for example, to spirits, beer, or RTDs, where there is systemically much more agility. So we have to play within that operating production system that we have. But what I fundamentally see and believe, and the work that I do, is about how do we future-proof that best. And even with small or limited marketing budgets, so to speak, there is a wealth of information available, at the touch of a button on our screens, in terms of understanding consumer behavior. Not just IWSR, where I happen to be a director and investor, but many, many other businesses around the world are producing lots of content, lots of information about wine, about drinks, but about consumer behavior in general. So just, disciplining within a small business to say, actually, we can go and buy great data like IWSR, quick plug there, but also, IWSR and other people are also putting out lots of data, lots of information for us to use. So even small and medium-sized businesses can access a lot of information to guide their decision-making.
Okay. So I think I'll try to stick with what we can expect more and more, and we can go a little deeper into each thing, right? Like, I think you laid out a perfect foundation of what we can expect. Let's break this down by markets, right? So we have the developing nations, we have the emerging nations, we have maybe China in itself as a beast, which have contributed to the majority of the decline, because that's where the biggest dip came, as far as like wine goes, let's say. Where do you see the markets playing? Like, where are the opportunities? Where are the markets which are you still thinking that it's going to be like really 10% and more down?
We'll start with the US. The US is still the most attractive wine market globally. I mean, that's primarily based on, obviously, the number of consumers, so the size of market, per capita consumption. And again, actually at IWSR, one of the things that we've been doing for many years is what we call the wine market attractiveness model. So what we do is we take lots of demographic and socioeconomic information about 50 countries around the world. So we look at GDP, we look at number of consumers of legal drinking age, we look at percentage rates of alcohol consumption, of wine consumption. So loads of economic and demographic input variables, numbers. And then we also look at how much wine is consumed, whether it's domestic or imported, whether it's at more premium or standard price points, whether that's been increasing or decreasing, whether it's forecast to increase or decrease. We get all of those numbers and we pump them into a large model that we have, and kind of outspits what we call wine market attractiveness scores. So it's a combination of all of those different variables. And then what we can do every year is we can look at which markets are the most attractive. Now, I have to kind of caveat that with, this is a global model. So obviously, if you're a producer, say in Chile, that hierarchy might move because, Chilean wine might be stronger, for example, as it is in South Korea, versus Australia. So you have, so there is clearly there is variability.
But let's say if we take the producers out, like you don't care who's, it's just a report. Like it just says this is the top 3 markets where you see strongness still. It's US 1.
So US 1, Canada 2, Switzerland 3, and that's currently, so that's the 2024 market attractiveness model.
I'm very curious because based on our lot of like bootstrapping way of understanding the markets, we see growth in new opportunities opening up in Thailand, Vietnam. A lot of free trade agreements happening there. Have you seen, like, is that just a myth, but by data, maybe it's not there yet?
No, definitely there are kind of pockets of growth opportunity in the markets that you mentioned. They tend to be lower down in this kind of global hierarchy, mainly because they're currently relatively small consumption markets, but they're certainly there.
And maybe all your factors don't tick there.
Yeah,
like maybe they cannot afford a $20 wine still, for example.
Exactly. So that's why this model is a starting point, and obviously if somebody's using it, then you need to kind of factor in those kind of local differences or supply chain where you have distribution, etc., etc. What's been really interesting this year is where we've seen the kind of highest growth, and we're seeing that particularly in some of the Nordic markets. And also one that's really kind of gone up the ranking tables in the last couple of years is the UAE, so United Arab Emirates, where there has been, or we're seeing kind of relatively quite some strong future opportunity in those markets.
Okay, I just want you to say
be people's kind of first instinct or thought when you're thinking about wine market attractiveness.
Yeah, it just looks very tough because of regulation, just by the sound of it. Like it looks like travel shops and five-star hotels. That's it, right? But I may be wrong. Give me one liner on these three countries, please, because I think people would love to know what's happening and what you think will happen in 2025. So UK, Germany, and China.
I'll start with UK. Again, prediction forecast is for ongoing volume declines for wine specifically. What was the next? Germany was the next one. Again, pretty similar patterns there. China, gosh, that's a challenging market to predict and forecast as a researcher. We are not seeing the kind of rebounds in China post-COVID that were potentially anticipated. Again, that's for all beverage alcohol, but also for wine in particular. So I suspect, or my personal view is that actually China is going to be a pretty challenging market for wine, and not maybe the beacon of hope and light that we had imagined 1 or 2 years ago.
So if I was a producer, I would definitely put my time and money for US, here. And I 100% agree, because I can sense it. Like the consumer is so strong still. Let's move to the other element here, like the categories or the products, right? Like where you see, what is your observation? Like I'll just throw in couple, because I know that's, hot, but maybe you can throw more, like sustainable products, no and low wines, for example. But maybe what do you see more in the growth trajectory, and what do you think really will be a tough one in 2025?
Well, if we look at where we are seeing growth currently, so what's happening at the moment, in wine, which, as we said at the beginning, is not a strong category from a growth point of view. Let me just kind of drop in a number around that. So if we take the 10 years to 2028, so that 2018 to 2028, globally, 1 in 5 bottles of wine less or fewer will be sold. So if I put that another way, 20% reduction in that 10 years to 2028 of the total volume of wine consumed globally.
How did you predict that? Like, what are the indicators for that decision?
Yeah. So where's that data coming from? Again, that's coming from historical data from IWSR. So we know what has been sold from 2018 to now 2024. And then we can forecast based on historical trends and all of our forecasting models. So we have kind of a range of sort of quite sophisticated forecasting models. So we can forecast through to 2028, and we can simply look at that difference in volume and see that actually overall 20% reduction in the total volume of wine consumed globally in that 10-year period. Now, I will caveat that the majority of that reduction is coming from entry-level price points. So the lower end price points, as opposed to kind of premium, super premium, and luxury. But that's the reality of the wine environment in that 10-year horizon.
So maybe this is the case volume, let's say, but the dollar volume may be not that less.
No, so really good point. So if you look at the dollar volume, on that same comparison timeline, it's marginally increased. So the overall value is actually rising a little bit. Now, if we take inflation into account, that's kind of negligible. So let's say, actually the value is holding, but the volume is reducing.
What is your, solution of aligning yourself to the category or the market? Like, you just do a private label. I mean, worst case, if you cannot make it, like what's your advice?
Yeah, so a big question there. So if we're thinking about where we're seeing from a consumer behavior point of view, where are consumers going? So let's start there. So what we do know is consumers are moving. Again, I'm generalizing hugely, but if we do just look at the global trends, consumers are doing a few key things. They're moving to white wine from red. Now, clearly, many people are still going to drink red wine. But if you just look at the overall shift in dynamics, there is a move towards white wine. There is a move towards fresher, fruitier, and potentially, and to a certain extent, sweeter red wine. There is definitely a move to rosé. And particularly premium and premium plus rosé, so the kind of higher end, let's use kind of Provence style price points and Provence style rosé. And the expectation that we're seeing is that the previous growth we saw in sparkling wine will continue. So there are definitely pockets of growth. We are also seeing, again, from very small bases relatively, but some pockets of strong growth in alternative formats. So premium bag-in-box, premium can, and also wine-based RTDs, so wine spritzers or ready-to-drinks RTDs that have a wine base. So although all of those alternative packaging are still very small proportionally compared to bottled wine sales, they are pockets of growth.
Amazing. So if I was a producer, I would really write all these points and then come up with at least the product. I'll try to fix my product and align that to the consumer. And then comes the market, which we spoke about. I'll focus on that market. Now let's go on the marketing, which is the contextual connection between the consumer and and the winery. Have you seen any data on what kind of mediums or channels or type of communications are expected or will be working in 2025?
Yeah. So if we talk about marketing and marketing investment, marketing communications, if we look at the kind of marketing, the field of marketing science, whatever we want to call it, there's kind of the biggest single factor that impacts brand growth. So if we're thinking about wine brands in this case, is awareness and salience.
What is the second word?
Salience. So salience means, can I remember a brand at the point of purchase? So if we look at, what is the one big thing that helps wine brands, in fact, all brands, this is a rule that works across all categories. So spirits, beer, shoes, cars, anything, chocolate, we can name anything. The biggest driver of brand growth is simply getting awareness. Because if we think about it, it's kind of, logical. If you're not aware of a brand, you're not going to be buying a brand. So for me, when I'm advising wine businesses or drinks businesses, it always comes back to, what are we doing to drive awareness? Because if I look after awareness, which can convert to salience, so this, I remember it at the point of purchase, that is the single biggest factor that's going to help my brand grow.
Agreed. And I think that the second part, the second salience, is also helping you with the repeat purchase, because a lot of people forget, what did I have? What did I drink last time?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's it's hugely easy for us working in wine or in drinks we're passionate about our products, we're passionate about our brands, we're paid to be passionate about our products and our brands because it's our job. Real people, normal consumers around the world actually don't care about our brands. Guess what? It's not that important. They like wine, they like drinking wine, but in the grand scheme of things, is it, the most important thing in their lives? No, absolutely not. So just kind of trying to get cut through in people's really busy, noisy, stressful lives. And we know from, our BevTrack data at IWSR that looks at, how consumers are feeling. So mood, how optimistic are they feeling? Consumers around the world right now are not feeling very optimistic.
True.
And if you think about the reality of that, we know from our data that that optimism is not on the rise, and it is fairly systemic globally. Most consumers are not very optimistic right now. People are worried about their finances. They're worried about job security. They're worried about political unrest.
There's a lot of suspense going on.
Yeah,
like a fake economy. It looks the war, the scene, the election. Everything is just suspense. Yeah.
And then where does wine or drinks come into that? It's that kind of reward, social glue. But, does which wine I buy over another one matter as long as I kind of like the taste? No, not really.
Yeah.
So that's looping back to this distinctiveness.
That's true. The psychology of today's consumer is not giving it a priority, that, okay, I really want this wine, whatever, I'm just grabbing. Yeah. But you're right.
So it's about how do you create brands and products that have that cut through of distinctiveness in a noisy world that generate awareness to drive salience.
Maybe throw some optimism and positivity in the communication. So the awareness, let's see, what are the 3 or 4 macro plays or some good examples you think that can create awareness for a winery, that they should do, or any advice that if a client asks you that, hey, what shall I do to create awareness in 2025? Yeah, I know it's a broader question.
It's a big question,
But if you just had $10,000 and you had to work on the top 3 things.
Yeah, and again, an unhelpful answer of it depends, because it clearly does, what kind of winery you are, where you're operating, who your kind of primary audience is, so there's lots of it depends. But I would always start with is my branding distinctive? Is it really clear what I stand for? FYI, and by the way, I stand for family owned. We come from a nice place and we're good quality is not differentiation and not distinctive. Most wine brands in the world, many wine brands in the world, wineries would claim that. So, absolutely examine, have a really difficult conversation with yourself internally. Are we really distinctive and relatively differentiated? And could people recognize my brand, my wine, my product if they didn't, somebody like me, who has to wear glasses because I can't see, so if I haven't got my glasses on in the shop, could I recognize the brand without my glasses on? And that for me is the 101 test. Is there something about that? So get that right first. And then your investment in driving your awareness, as we were talking about earlier, is, who are my primary target audience? Now, it might be my local market. Literally might be I'm a wine producer in South Australia, and my primary local market is South Australia. So what can I do to drive connection and awareness in South Australia? Or I might be exporting. So I'm thinking about, but maybe with my $10,000 budget, that's going to be a little bit more tricky. But there are great ways of creating awareness through social media. And that for me is, I think we're missing a little bit of humor and fun and smiles in the wine industry. I think particularly given what we were talking about earlier, which is the kind of state of mind of many people around the world at the moment, kind of a gentle humor that raises a smile.
And I think we got to talk with them, right? Not on them.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
Okay. What are some sort of good examples that you've seen on the platforms? Like, you think Instagram, TikTok, or magazines, or what kind of platforms do you think are really good for 2025?
Yeah, and again, it depends. Not helpful answer, but so I can think of two really good examples. So Archer Ruse, who is it's a premium canned wine brand in the US. And I would recommend anybody to go and have a look at their kind of TikTok, their YouTube, their video content. And it's really what I was just saying there. Now, they happen to be now co-owned by the amazing actor Elizabeth Banks. So, they've got a bit of a head start there. They've got, kind of a celebrity who's now owner of the brand. And guess what? She's an actor as well. But just look at their positioning and how they're communicating. They're talking constantly about the premium nature of their product, but they're just doing it with a smile and with that kind of accessibility. So, think about, is there a way, we can create content like that, with our winemakers in our winery, out in the vineyard when we're, at harvest, when things go right, when things don't go right, is there just a way of kind of connecting with people just so that it becomes more memorable? We know that any content that is linked to kind of humor or smiling or anything like that, it gets us our brains going.
You're right. I'm picking some words here. Like, I think, did the content will you remember that? It's as good as like the name thing, right? Like, will you remember that post? Did it make you do something like a laugh or, we talked about the traditional distribution and sales, but what about the tourism or the cellar door sales, or, what is your observation on this channel, D2C? What are your takes there?
Hugely important. Absolutely massively important for those wineries that do have a kind of winery or tourism opportunity. Interestingly, so I remember, as you're saying that, I now remember a piece of research we did quite a few years ago, but I still think it is super relevant amongst people visiting wineries in Australia. So we were asking, why did you go? What did you do when you were there, et cetera, et cetera. And we found that a third of visitors to wineries, tourism visitors to wineries in Australia, didn't do wine tasting when they visited. So did not do wine tasting. A third. So you're kind of thinking, actually, this is about an event, a day out, a morning out, connecting with friends. It's much, much more beyond simply the wine tasting element of it. And if you think about it, a lot of wineries I go to, and I can think of them all around the world, you kind of rock up and a tasting mat is put in front of you with 3, 4, 5 glasses which are poured out, and you kind of stand there slightly awkwardly in silence, which I've done quite a few times with other people, slightly whispering, and you sort of taste the wines, and then you think, well, what am I supposed to taste? Do I like them? Do I not like them? There might be a great person behind the counter, kind of talking you through them, but is that super memorable experience that you're going to go back to? Feels quite intimidating. I've worked in wine for over 30 years, and I stand there and kind of feel slightly intimidated by that
Agreed.
experience.
100% agree. Like, there is a commercial kind of experience, which is just crap feeling, and then there is very organic hospitality sort of experience, which you remember.
Yeah. So for me, that's really important. And then, or you asked about DTC as well. Super important. Again, if we go back to
I think just on that, Lulie, I think on that other point you said, which is a very nice point. A lot of people are not advertising, like, come and see behind the scenes of winery, meet the winemaker. That is also as important. Like, I really like walking around in the fields or go in the winery instead of tasting now, right? So a lot of people are curious about how the operation looks like. or who this scientist winemaker, handshake with the winemaker. So I think the wineries have a great opportunity instead of just tasting and selling focus. They can sort of curate experiences. And even if it's just showing them, how a winery plant looks like, can be a good one.
Yeah, and then other things as well. It's, what's relevant to your target audience? What else are they doing in their lives? I'll give another example here, actually from beer, talking about kind of connecting and messaging and connecting with consumers. Michelob Light. So they were, ranked number 7th or 8th at the time. This is going back kind of 10 years, 12 years for light beer in the light beer market in the US. And they did a really simple piece of research, which is they looked at their target audience. So that was for them, people in their kind of 30s into 40s. And they were looking at what those people were posting on Facebook. So what types of activities were going on in their target audience's life. And what they found was this huge over-indexing amongst their target audience in the US for people posting about and doing Tough Mudders. So I don't know whether you're aware of Tough Mudders.
No.
So Tough Mudder is a experience you do. It's a bit like an organized run. But rather than just doing running, it's basically an assault course and there's loads of mud on it. So you have to go sort of run between the various stages, not very far, and then go up slippery, inflatables and down ladders and under nets and things like that. And it's tough and it's muddy. So it's called a Tough Mudder. And you sort of sign up and you often do it with friends, maybe do it for charity. And it's kind of really exhilarating. It's quite physical. And then you end up really muddy and you take pictures of yourself and post them and go, look, I've just done a Tough Mudder. Michelob Light realized that their target audience was hugely into tough mudders. And then they explored more. And what they realized was their target audience actually were quite kind of gym freaks and fitness freaks and really loved socializing. So what they did for their positioning and all their communication was around being social athletes. So the idea of a light beer was kind of enabled you to, have a beer after you've been to the gym, you've done your Tough Mudder, you're meeting up with friends. You could still drink beer because it happened to be a light beer, but it was all focused around understanding that their target audience, a lot of their socializing was done through gym, through sport, and through kind of physical activities. So the reason I bring up that story is, as you're asking me the questions, I'm sitting here thinking, well, why couldn't a winery host a Tough Mudder or an equivalent that is relevant to your, or a 5K run or a vineyard sponsored walk, where you go up and down every row and it's a 20K walk. So it's also all those other things that are reasons for consumers to come and visit your winery that go beyond the wine.
We just did a call with Liz from Wine Market Council, and her recent data, she said that the wine tourism is going to decline a little bit, and we should go where the consumer is going, like the old days, like take the experience where the consumer is. So if it's Chicago downtown, something you got to do with the Chicago people, like that, right? If you're a Napa winery. So what are you predicting as far as the footfalls? Do you think that will go down and we should go where the consumers are?
Well, I think yes and yes. So Liz is fantastic and her research is always really good. So I would always pay attention to what she's saying. So I think it's yes and yes. It depends, again, where you're located, what your facilities are, your access to local market. I'm always a fan of local market because local market can come back and visit time and time again. Whereas, typically an overseas visitor might come once in their lifetime.
True. Like English wine region have a great opportunity for doing both. For example, like playing with London, and then it's very close. Yeah. But maybe South Africa is like really reliant on tourism.
Yeah, exactly. So I think it depends. I think you can make reasons for people to come and connect at your facility. But I very much also agree with what Liz is saying, which is that, take the experience to them. For example, I was relatively recently in Hobart in Tasmania, and one of the kind of biggest whiskey producers there has a sort of downtown whiskey tasting room, right on the waterfront. So, whereas, getting to the distillery, is a couple of hour and a half drive from Hobart. So what you're doing there is you're kind of accessing, people who live in Hobart who might want to, combine that whiskey tasting or go for a glass of whiskey as part of an evening out, as well as the tourists who are passing through Hobart or visitors to Hobart. So I think both work. I think, that kind of idea of urban wineries, meeting consumers where they are, absolutely. It's a relatively large investment. So one way of doing it is through, I'm a huge fan of collaboration. So working with on-premise establishments, bars, restaurants, hotels, hospitality, and doing collaboration and pop-up, which is more, back to our smaller wineries or mid-sized wineries, that's more realistic.
I really, admire your leadership as well. And I think you've seen, you are a CEO, end of the day, you've built your company, right? So I would want to ask a question around that. If you were a winery of about medium size, like 20 people, let's say $4 to $5 million sales, which is a little bit of exports, distribution, D2C, cellar door, what would your self-talk look like and your internal sort of, game plan look like, and how would you sort of inspire your team and yourself?
So I thought you might ask me this question, and I was thinking about this, and I was thinking, actually, I'm going to answer it slightly differently, if that's okay, which is I was thinking about it from my winery. So I am in that position. We planted 4 years ago. We're tiny at the moment. We have 12 acres of Pinot Noir. So we're moving towards kind of full yields. So at the moment, I sell my grapes as a grape grower. But if I was to think about that very small scale business, and you could kind of scale up to your example, what would I be doing next? So I'm thinking about it. I've got 12 acres of Pinot Noir. It might be 24, it might be 48, whatever it is. What do I do with that? So I'm thinking, well, the number one thing I do is I don't make red wine, I make rosé. Number one, because I know that I can get relatively more premium, ironically, more premium price points at the sort of mid part of the market. I would then think, well, how do I make myself distinctive and memorable? So I would only, to start with, produce my wine in magnums. No bottle, no 75 cl, magnums only, higher price point. So you might think, okay, Lulie, you're a bit mad. Why are you only putting your wine in magnums? And I'm thinking about that because I'm thinking, actually, if I go to my target consumer, and in my case, it would be English consumers, because I'm talking an example, my local market. Actually, I know that one of the primary occasions for rosé is group socializing. And what do people really love? They love something that looks exciting, that looks big, that looks interesting, that I can turn up to a party kind of going, or I can serve it. So I'm only going to do magnums. I'm also maybe going to do a few special blends every year, depending on how my grapes grow. Maybe I'll buy in a few grapes from one of my neighbours. And maybe I'll get some guest winemakers, maybe a guest winemaker over from South Africa or Italy or France, where we do a guest rosé. And we're starting to collaborate together. And maybe I go over to their winery. So I'm now connected with a winery in South Africa. Even though we're both doing our own brands, they're completely separate. I'm tapping into their market, they're tapping into my market. I'm then going to think about my marketing tactics. So I'm thinking of my local market. I know that typically my consumers are going to be in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's who can afford what I'm selling. I'm selling magnums. They're going to be 70, 80 pounds a magnum. So I'm thinking, what do my local people do? Well, they play a lot of tennis. Increasingly, they're playing padel. So maybe I'll sponsor or I'll do some events at those. And I'm going to make sure that a magnum of my wine gets to each of the local schools for their socials and fundraisers, because that's about raising awareness. I've grown a little bit, so we're a few years on now, and I'm now starting to think about export. I'm going to go to 2 markets first, Switzerland and Singapore. Why? Because again, the average price point paid in Switzerland is higher. We know that, relatively there's less domestic rosé produced, and I'm going to do pop-up events at ski lodges and bars. So I'm going to talk my way into doing pop-up events in the middle of winter with rosé. Because rosé is about sociability and it's about sharing. It's about kind of, marking the moment, and skiing is that moment. There's sunshine, there's holiday, and often you're skiing in groups. In Singapore, I'm going to find a really cool, older, so somebody who's targeting women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s fashion designer. Local, small scale, and I'm going to do a collaboration with them. We're going to have a fashion show that we're going to co-fund. My wine's going to be there. We're going to get lots of photos taken. Maybe she'll blend in some of the colour of my wine into some of her fashion, and maybe we'll do it that way. And in the meantime, I'm going to be driving my content through my Facebook, because us older consumers still use Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. So there you go. That's what I would do.
Amazing. What a nice blueprint. You're going to get some consulting calls. I think that's that's a very nice. That was I think very nicely put, exactly on what we spoke about. So you picked things and you put your money where your mouth was, basically. And I think we could see, if people can listen and connect this, they could exactly see the platforms, the channels, the market, the strategy, the product, and so on. So fantastic. Thank you so much. Lulie, anything else that you would want to add here? Anything where they can find you, or anything about what you're up to these days?
Yep. So you can find me on LinkedIn. So Lulie Halstead. So if anybody's interested in commenting or getting in touch or for my help, just DM me via LinkedIn.
Hey guys, thanks for listening to this call. I think awesome and amazing insight. So try to listen to this again, with pen and paper. I think there is a lot of cues in this call, a lot of insights in this call. Write all the pieces and then maybe lay out your strategy for 2025. I also wanted to, remind all the wineries that are looking to grow in 2025 that London Wine Competition can also help you grow, with some awareness that we touched base about. So we have done some great global influencer and press partnerships, especially the market that Lulie was mentioning, which is the US. We are really strong personally in the US market, and Beverage Trade Network can really help you grow, your brand. So if you are a winery, who's looking for some help, enter into the London Wine Competition before the deadline. Go to londonwinecompetition.com and see how we can help you. Thank you.